man. I'll tell you what, that dang old internet, man, you just go on there and point and click it, and then talk about www. Call me, you got then.
For some reason or another, you sounded a little taller on radio.
Well, for my money, he's got all the facial characteristics of a criminal.
Now, here's your host, that gravy sopping, crappie flopping, stump jumping, Bible thumping, gun toting, mater growing son of a gun, the Backwoods Baptist himself, Pastor Harold Smith.
Welcome to the Backwoods Baptist podcast. I got another good one for you today. I don't always say that when it's just me. I usually say I got a good one for you when I got somebody good with me today, and that's the case. I got Derrick Bremmer, pastor of Denver St Missionary Baptist Church in Greenwood for the moment, and we'll talk about his future in the ministry and where he's headed in a little bit. But let me first welcome you to the podcast today. We are coming to you live from 522 Main Street, the home of the international home of the Backwoods Baptist podcast, Backwoods Baptist World Headquarters, Universal Headquarters. This is the only Backwoods Baptist I know of in the whole universe. Also the home of the Backwoods Book Company, where we give away free Christian books and literature every Saturday from 9 to 5. Also, we have a little pastor's lounge in the back. That's where Derrick and I are seated. And we're just going to kick it around and talk ministry and what's going on. And we've been thinking about doing this. We've talked about doing it before I even started the American tour back in late July, early August. We talked about doing it at the start of summer. But there's been development since then that's made it more pressing. But then I had 70-some-odd, not 70-some-odd, that's a way off number, 20 or 30-some-odd podcasts recorded with pastors around the country that I needed to cycle through. And then I was sitting on about 3 or 4 topics that I was waiting for those to end that I wanted to discuss. And then Russell came along last week and we jumped in on lazy preachers, which are legion among us. And so now it's finally rolled around to me and you sitting down and just talking about life, ministry, and what's going on. So Derrick, thanks for taking time out of your busy ministry schedule to sit down here at the Backwoods Book Company and do a podcast with me. How are you today?
I'm very good. I'm very excited to be here. Been looking forward to it. We have been talking about it a long time, but you had to get the celebrities on here and everything.
Yeah, the unknown. I had to get all the unknown preachers from obscure places of the country covered. Well, I recorded, I don't remember now, 20-some-odd interviews in a 6-week period, and so I was traveling all around the country. I was dropping those every 5 days. Another one would come up. And when you interview that many preachers, toward the end, there's still people that are like 5 preachers behind, and some of those interviews were 2 hours long. You don't just listen to a 2-hour interview unless you've got some real time on your hands where you can, like you said, you're driving or something. We were talking earlier. And so there's still people going, hey, I'm only to Bruce Short, or I just listened to Bruce Short. And I'm like, well, you're almost to the end,
They are the best preachers you've never heard of. And listening to them, the conversations, I'm really glad you did that.
Yeah.
Took time out of your schedule to travel and go visit them and encourage them. And
I felt God was pressing me to do that, honestly. It wasn't like I just thought, hey, I've got some extra ministry funds. I need to, and I don't have extra ministry funds. This is the funny thing. And I'll say this just to kind of give people an insight to my view of ministry funds. I don't think I need to be a savings account setting on, a big chunk of money for a rainy day when God quits providing. But the nature of my personal ministry is one where I transitioned from a pastoral ministry in the same church, preaching 2-3 times a week to the same congregation for a year to 2 years at a time. And I'm heavily engaged in, addressing their budget, changing their practices, trying to figure out why they're in the shape they're in, and correct that so the next guy can come in and build on it. So that's a very intensive, dialed in one area every week's the same stuff, to when that church finds a pastor, I don't have nothing to do. I'm sitting around twiddling my thumbs. Well, usually I have a bunch of churches that say, whenever you finish up at your next church, we'd like for you to come, present your ministry or update us, because they already support my ministry, or I want you to preach a revival or a conference or whatever, just once I play through all those preaching opportunities, that itinerant ministry, I never know what those kind of, roles bring home financially. You can go preach somewhere and get $50. Right. You can go preach somewhere on a Sunday and get $500. Now look, if every church gave you $500 to preach on a weekend, why, I'd be looking for a second bookstore to run. But if every church gives you $50, then I'm like, oh, okay, some of that money that's kind of built up in my ministry account, I need to be living on that. So that ministry account swells and shrinks.
But I think that's an important part of just being a steward of what God's given us.
Yeah.
It's important that we use what God gives us for his purposes. He's not given us, we shouldn't look at what God's given us as he's given us to take care of tomorrow or the next day, because he'll give us that tomorrow and the next day.
Yeah. And I think sometimes in missionaries, there's this idea of, I need X amount of dollars to operate. And if I can hit that number, then everything's going to be okay. On the other hand, I never saw Paul say that. And we have a pretty extensive travel itinerary of Paul.
Right.
At times, Paul is sending out other people to do work and funding it, I'm sure. I can't imagine him saying, hey, go out and best of luck to you. He's funding those other guys to go out that he's sending away. And then at times, Paul's over there working with his own hands, so he's not a burden on the church. He's trying to, to strengthen. And so we've got Paul here financially undersupported, Paul overflowing with support, and the ministry flourishing, but Paul's never not doing what he's supposed to be doing, whether the funds are there or not. So what I felt like at the time was like, I'll just give you the numbers. I had $30,000 in my ministry account. Now, to some people, that's chicken feed. To me, that's nearly a year's pay. And so I was sitting there with $30,000. I said, look, I don't need a year's pay sitting in the bank. God gave me this money for a reason. And how could I best use it? So my first instinct was to find a church or a pastor that needed some financial assistance in some way. That didn't materialize, so I quit praying for that and started praying for something else. Then I realized in a lot of these conversations, trying to find preachers needing help and just kind of fishing, how's it going? How's your church? How's your family? I thought, the world needs to hear this guy's story. The world needs to hear about this little church up here. And God just pressed that on my heart so hard. He was like, dude, you're sitting here on $30,000. What's it going to cost you to drive around the country, a few nights motel stay, some meals on the road? You probably preach a little bit along the way. You probably take in a little. And so I just finished up my year-end financials. It's not the year-end, but I started kind of crunching the numbers. And I think I spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,000 to $4,000 when it's all said and done. Now, I'm taking my own mileage out off my taxes, so I'll get a pretty good tax deduction on that. But I'm talking about motels, meals, other things associated with that travel. I spent a couple $3,000, maybe $4,000, somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000. And I saw 20 or 30 preachers. I got to see churches I've never been in. I saw parts of the country I've never been to. I was greatly encouraged.
I think you probably did more than just if you would have found a pastor or a church that
and gave him $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000.
You probably invested more in spending time with them, hearing their stories, blessing. I think just assuming, but
yeah,
I've heard you preach. You probably bless those congregations.
And I've never. I'm such a weirdo, Derrick. I've never seen anybody else go, yeah, God called me to a ministry like yours. And I'm like, no, he didn't. If you're doing something weird, you're in your own ministry. But no, I don't know anybody who does what I do. And I don't say that like as a brag. I just say, when God gives me an idea, I'm like, well, that's weird. And I remember you and Russell and I were sitting in Calico County. And this was in 2023. My pastor now, Derrick Bremmer, and I and my current pastor, Russell Threet, he was not my pastor at the time, we all just decided to meet at Calico. You and Russell were in town, and you said, hey, let's call Harold. He may want to meet with us. So I scrambled over there. We all sat at Calico County, and y'all were talking to me. And you said, you really ought to, get you some kind of space where you can work with pastors and whatnot. And the Lord had already been working on me like just in the 3 or 4 days prior. And I just rattled off this big laundry list of things that I needed for a ministry headquarters. And I remember when I got done, I looked at you and Russell like, well, I wonder what they think of that. And y'all were looking at me like just blank stares on your face. And I was like, well, that didn't go over good. And then y'all both go, man, that's a great idea. And then I was like, yeah, that's confirmation. And so, but you were the first guys I told about it. And so y'all encouraged me. And it's funny that I spent a few months looking at locations and buildings before we ended up down here in Old Town Van Buren.
Oh, even that's a cool story, how you ended up here.
But when we were all sitting at the table talking, I said, I need a place to record the podcast. I need a place to meet with pastors and be able to host, even multiple churches represented, just a group of pastors together to strategize or whatever. I need a place to put up traveling missionaries. I had all these things in mind. And then in the front of it, I want to give away free Christian literature. And I find this building. And I had a guy that was going to help me buy it. He was going to buy it and rent it to me. And he was this thing was under auction. And so I showed up, and my buddy was on the phone with me. He was in Denver, and he had just gotten a huge bonus. And he's like, we're going to buy that building, and it's going to be your headquarters. And so we sat down here, and we kind of picked a price, and it got up above that price. And he kept bidding. And finally, I walked down this hallway, and I said, Jason, it is above. He goes, I've got money. We can keep going. And I'm like, but it's not going to be worth what we're paying for it. This just ain't the building. So I walked back up, and I told the auctioneer, that my bidder was out. And then the guy's filling out all the paperwork, and I said, hey, what's your plans here? You need a renter? And then he said, yeah. And I rode with him to the bank to get his money out of the bank to make the payment, because these auctioneers, they expect payment the day you buy it. And then there's a 30-day closing period. So I rode to the bank with him, told him my idea. We rode back and shook hands on a price to rent the building. And it's laid out just like I envisioned. There's a bookstore in the front. There's an office where I can meet with pastors. We've got this bigger room where we have lunches and fellowships. And then we've got a place in the back to put up traveling preachers, missionaries. And and
if you use this, so I've seen this, our little local association of churches that our church is a part of. We had a meeting here, something that we've never done before, and we really talked about what it looks like for churches to work together.
Yeah.
And what does it mean, not just to come together and do business, but to be a part of ministry together and invest in each other. And that was a cool meeting. And I
thought it was too. But the Lord gave me a building, a long, skinny building, laid out just the way we talked in that day at Calico County when I first just vocalized what was in my heart. And you guys kind of brought it out of me, because I wasn't going to tell anybody any of that. It was just, y'all just kept talking, and I'm like, no, this is what I really have in mind. And it was just, I don't know, all along the way. Now, the only thing I would change, even to this day, I've been here, I guess I'm coming up on 2 years. We opened this up in the spring of 2024. And so, spring of 2026 will be 2 years. I wish this room was a little larger. I mean, our last pastor's lunch, I think we had 14 men in here, and it's a little crowded. We got 3 couches and some chairs and a big table, but
Not boys.
yeah, they're preachers. They eat like God's heavyweights.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? These are like David had mighty men, men of renown. These guys are renowned at the buffet.
And you're cooking for all of them.
I'm cooking for all of them, and I don't have a kitchen in here, so I'm working in crock pots and if I had a kitchen and a little bit bigger room in here, I think and I would have a little bit bigger bookstore.
But what's cool from even just those times of fellowship, I think everyone leaves these meetings strengthened.
Yeah.
Like you were talking about me, you, and Russell at Calico County that day. I'm good at dreaming and kind of thinking, what if there were no limits? Russell's good at logistics. You're real good at practical, hands-on, rolling up the sleeves and getting to work.
Right.
And between all of us sitting down and having lunch, this really awesome ministry's taking shape. That's how many people has a bookstore reached? How many states?
34 states.
That's incredible.
We're in December, and we were crunching the numbers. We're like 1,760 some odd people have taken a free book or Bible from us this year. And then a lot of those people have also taken gospel tracts, pamphlets. We limit them to one book or one Bible, one book and Bible. We'll give them a book and a Bible. Bibles we don't count that as their book, but we can't just have, we can't just have greedy Christians come in and go, oh, I want all your Spurgeon books, Like, no, that's not how it works.
But it's strengthening churches, too. I've had people come to my church in Greenwood, so I'm 45 minutes away from here. And, they've talked about this Christian bookstore that they want to go to in Van Buren. And I've been like, you need to go on Saturday after about 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
And they go and say, man, that's awesome. I was like, yeah, the guy that runs it's kind of wild, but...
Yeah. Well, I don't know anybody else that does what I do. It's weird. But it's not wrong. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with being different. As long as you're biblically based and you have the glory of God in mind. And
I think that's what it means to be spirit-led.
Yeah.
Right? You're not spirit-led if you're just trying to copy everybody else around you. You're trying to be somebody that you're not. God's made each of us unique.
Yep.
He has a plan for all of us. He's given us guardrails through the scriptures. And if you're spending time with him in his word, I think he's going to give you a crazy idea every once in a while.
I think you're right. How in the world did we meet? Do you remember?
You had just taken the pastorate of a church that had gone through a bit of crisis.
That's right.
And that church was a part of this same association that I was a part of, and I found out they were without a pastor. Then I found out through it that their pastor had come there, and so I didn't want to step on any toes or anything, but I didn't know you, and I wanted to introduce you to the association. I wanted to ask if there was anything that we could do to support you at that church.
Yeah, you just want to be a good neighborly sister church.
And so I messaged you. I think you thought that I was like the DOM coming in to make sure you were doing everything
I think
right.
you were the president of the association that year.
Something like that. Probably moderator. I think
That moderator's the right title, yeah.
Yeah, so I reached out. You kind of put me off for a little bit, and I prayed about it. I reached out a second time, and you're like, yeah, I'll meet you for lunch sometime. And we met at Lynn's in Greenwood.
Lynn's Garden in Greenwood.
And ate some Chinese food, and
yep.
Man, we had a great conversation.
We
I really enjoyed that.
We did. It was good. Yeah, I remember, for years I pastored a church with no affiliation. I mean, we were Baptist, and we had came out of the Southern Baptist Convention years ago. But we were real hesitant to unite with any group, and so I kind of ran my own loose group called Preachers of Grace. And everybody pushed me to make that, this needs to be its own association. You need to formalize. You need a doctrinal statement. I'm like, no, I don't. You guys are just my friends. You're not my associates. And everybody was pushing me to do that kind of stuff and to kind of formalize. But I'm not organizational. I'm organic. I just happen. I'm not a planner. And anyways, that was all taking place. And I was kind of skeptical and leery of any kind of associational or conventional model, even the Independent Baptist, the IFB, that's the most organized group there is. They even tell you how to cut your hair, what kind of clothes you can and can't wear, So they're probably the most legalistic. And so when you called me, I'd remember that, Derrick. You called me, and I was like, that's moderator probably of the local Baptist Association, wanting me to come and put my hand on a book and swear allegiance, and
burn your incense.
Yeah, burn incense to him. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I was like, we'll be fine. But at the same time, I've never been the guy that went into a church and went, hey, you're all wrong. All your associations and affiliations are all wrong. You need to come. No, the church is the church, and who they're affiliated with is usually not the problem. It's not the affiliation. It's the internal workings of the church. Vance Havner had it best. He said the church has never suffered from woodpeckers on the outside like it has from termites on the inside. So I never go into a church and go, oh, you're Southern Baptist? Well, that's your problem. You need to leave the convention. Oh, you're BMA? Oh, that's your problem. You're ABA? That's not the problem. Who you associate with is never the problem. It's always the way you conduct business, and it's your reputation in the community that's usually the problem. So I remember just you and I talking, and you were part of the BMA, and I didn't know. I knew the history of the BMA because I studied Baptist history. I knew of the 1950-51 split from the ABA. I grew up in the ABA. I kind of saw you guys as a halfway house between the ABA and the SBC, kind of a more moderate ABA and a more legalistic SBC, and I just kind of left it at that. I didn't know. And there's not a lot of BMA churches around to look to in this area of Arkansas. So I was like, yeah, I'll go sit down with you. And the other strike I think I had in the back of my mind when you and I first met, the church I was interim at when we met was I was following the pastor that planted the church you were in.
Yeah, did you know that at the time, though?
I did. I grew up in Greenwood. I graduated with his daughter. So I was like, yeah, I know what's wrong with this church. I probably know what's wrong with that church. I was just judging you based upon the common denominator, which was the church planter.
So I had two strikes against
you. I thought, we're going to go to Lynn's Garden, and I'm going to call this guy out, and we're going to be done. And I got over there, and I was like, I like this guy. And we became good friends after that, and we really got to know each other, and I really developed a love for the BMA. And I can remember oftentimes calling you going, explain to me how this works. Explain to me what this guy does. Explain to me what this office in the BMA is for. And I kept
leading the blind.
No, I kept expecting you to give me some answer and go, aha, that's what I don't like about the BMA. And every time you would give me an answer, I would go, oh, if they had done it this way, they would have been Southern Baptists, and that's what's wrong with the Southern Baptists. So when I kept looking at the BMA structure, I was like, these guys have avoided the major pitfalls of the SBC. I'm not saying they're perfect. They got issues.
But you have issues in any church.
Sure.
In
any group of churches, you're going to have issues. But their structure, the associational structure, resolved the convention flaws. And by convention, I mean the convention model of doing business. And so when I saw the higher leadership of individual churches, collectively as churches, I said, okay, they haven't created a bureaucracy in Nashville that's, calling all the shots. You're always going to have a little bit of a bureaucracy. I always say anywhere money pulls up, buzzards and lawyers both arrive.
Well, I think to some degree one of the spiritual gifts that we have is administration. We need administrators to some extent. Yeah,
because I'm not one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you were instrumental for me, and I would call you and ask you a question, and you would say, here, and you'd tell me, and then you gave me a book, that book that's like, describes the early days. It's kind of like a history of the BMA.
Written by Dr. Duggard.
Yeah.
The BMA, 1950 to, I think, goes up to the 70s.
Yeah, 50 to 80 or something like that. 30 years in the BMA or something like that. I read that, and I mean, it resonated with me. I was like, yes. These guys are pushed back against a kind of a larger-than-life figure, and that was trying to run things himself. And I read that, and it resonated, and I said, man, I should have been in the BMA all along. And I gave you your book back. The BMA seminary, of all people, send me a box of used books for the bookstore, and they're great books. And I'm going through, I'm like, these are great books. And then I find that out of print history of the BMA, and I'm like, I've got my own copy. This ain't going on the bookstore shelf. It's going on Harold's shelf, because I love history and stuff like that. So anyways, but you were instrumental in getting me involved. And I remember when West Park, the church I was serving at the time, called a pastor, I was invited to come to the BMA United Association meeting and kind of present my work.
It's a needed work.
Yeah.
I mean,
and my pastor was invited, as kind of, hey, I'm the new pastor, and the church had been a little uninvolved. And in that meeting, y'all voted to support me monthly as a missionary. The association did. And you voted the newest pastor in the association, to be the treasurer. And I thought, this kind of stuff would never happen in the good old boy club. You'd have to learn the secret handshake and go on a few moonlight walks with important people. You'd have to have some inside information. And so that point on, I was like, yeah, I should have been more heavily involved. I just didn't know. And so who do I fault for that? Is it me? No, I think the BMA is not a very good publicity agent for their own ministries and work, because I think they tend to be, and if they have a flaw, it's this. They tend to just kind of, their family tree looks like a blackberry bramble. It's just all intertwined. All their churches are intertwined. All the people graduate, go back in, and there's not a lot of outside, influence. But to their credit, I've been pretty well embraced as an outsider. I mean, I'm writing articles in their newspaper 4 years later, 3 years later. So I can't complain as far as how they've treated me, but I've tried to be I've tried to be an advocate of the BMA. And I think that's probably why I'm just naturally in this conversation telling people how you were instrumental in helping me understand the BMA and getting me more involved in the BMA. And I love it. I'm glad it's that way. And
I come from a different background because I was discipled in a BMA church. I surrendered to ministry in a BMA church, and I saw very early on the importance of being able to say I'm a part of something bigger than what I can even behold.
Yeah.
And not just in the spiritual sense, of course that's true, but practically there's a spiritual sense of what God is doing among his larger people. And so I saw that value early on when I was doing my education, my training. I remember trying to push myself to be critical of, all right, so what does it actually look like to be missionary-minded as a Christian? And I looked out, and like I said, this is where I've always been. But I looked out, and I think the most biblical model for churches working together can be found in associational ministry.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. I think if you start prying back the layers of the book of Acts and the epistles, you kind of pry them back like an onion. The deeper you get, the more you see that there were men that were appointed to the task of doing things. I know people that get all bent out of shape. Committees aren't in the Bible. Yes, they are. Corinth appointed one to carry their offering to Jerusalem. They didn't call it a committee, but appoint men, plural, that you want to do this work. That's a committee, Jack.
The Jerusalem Council.
Yes.
They called together
Yeah.
It wasn't everyone in that church.
And it wasn't just the elders. Sorry,
Right.
Reformed Baptists, you
Right.
missed that one. It pleased the apostles, elders, and the whole church. That's what we call a unanimous vote in the congregational rule. And it wasn't the elders that sent out the letter. It was the church. And the BMA still recognizes the church as an authority, the authority. But because they have appointed people to task, and hold them accountable through the churches, they can send out worldwide missionaries. I don't know any individual church that's solely sending out individual missionaries internationally around the world. I'm sure they exist.
I think if they looked at how much it cost to send just the expense of an international ministry like that, you would only have your mega churches that would even be able to dream of that vision. But mega churches aren't the only place where God's calling people.
That's right. Yeah, I don't know if he's in most mega churches. I mean, in the words of, I can't even remember the guy's name, Tony Hudson, God ain't 100 miles of that place, you know. But when I say that because if a church had to be so large that they could send out their own, international missionary, you would only have a handful of churches that could send one. And how many could they send? And so how do smaller churches get involved in missions? Do they just surrender their money to a large church and let the large church do the decision?
So this is where I think, even today, I think there's a disconnect between what we know the Bible says is the right way to support missionaries and the way that we functionally think about it. There's probably a better way to say that, but I think for some people, we've grown up in a tradition where we write our check and we send it to the central agency that takes care of this for us. But when we read the Bible, Paul goes back and he checks on the church in Jerusalem. He checks on the church in Antioch. He checks in with them because they are his authority.
Mm-hmm.
He cares about them. They care about him.
Mm-hmm.
If all we're doing is supporting missionaries financially, we're not really sending missionaries to the world. We're not really a part of the Great Commission.
We're just a clearinghouse that's handling money.
Mm-hmm. And that's a danger. That is a big risk.
Well, what happens is you have all this money coming into one spot, and here's all the money. It's all right here. And then you're like, I really need a secretary to help me count all this money each month. And the secretary goes, I really need a secretary to help me be the secretary to count all this money each month. And then they're like, we really need a building to count all this money each month. And then they're like, we really need a janitor to clean the toilets in the building this month because we got to count all this money here. And then next thing you know, you've got a building that looks something like a corporate bank in a capital city in a state, and there's 58 employees in there, and only 40% of that, I'm sorry, I was describing Southern Baptist, but that's what happens.
Well, and what
40% of the money actually leaves the state.
We say that the church is an organism, that it's not an organization. It's not a business. So like you were talking about your ministry and kind of what motivated you to be able to see that you're able to go out and be a part of all these other conversations. Man, if you were a business and you had 30 grand sitting in the bank, you would say, we're profiting, we're doing great, we need to store this back, or we need to invest this back into ourselves. And, that's not the way the church is supposed to operate. No. That's not the way Christians are supposed to operate. At some level in everyone's life, we've got to come to a point and say, God has given me enough. What does he want me to do with this?
Yeah. How many churches do you know that are sitting on six figures?
What do you call them, churches?
Well, I'm talking about in the bank, they've got a $50,000 CD for just in case, and then they've got a couple of $20,000 CDs for just in case, and then they've got another 15 grand in their checking account, and their monthly budget's somewhere around $6,000. I'm like,
now, if you're talking specific numbers, and you can't
I'm not giving any churches numbers. I'm just saying round numbers. I know churches that are operating on $6,000 a month that are sitting on $100,000 in the bank. Yep. $6,000 a month is $72,000 a year. Do you need a full year's provision in the bank? Oh, what are we, Mormon? Isn't it Mormons that always have to have a year's provision put back?
It's bad stewardship.
I think it is, and here's why. What you're saying is God may cease to dry up all provisions of this church for at least a year, and we could still get by without him.
Yeah, that's a dangerous place to be in.
You bet it's a dangerous place to be in. Now, there's nothing wrong with having money on hand in case a heat and air unit goes out.
And if you're a church that the ministries that your church does cost $1 million, obviously you need more money set back.
Yeah, but there needs to be some kind of percentage here.
But it should cover operating expenses. It should
Yeah.
cover what do I need while I'm waiting.
So what would happen if all of a sudden we needed more than we had? I wonder what the church would do. They'd probably have a rummage sale. They would probably, everybody bring your junk to the church and we'll have a church yard sale and raise money. And if that don't work, the second weekend, the youth group will wash cars in the parking lot. Well, how about this novel idea that we do what the early church did and we have an all-night prayer meeting and ask God to provide for his church? That's what's missing. They're trusting in their money, and they're trusting in their ability to raise it, and they're trusting in their ability to continue to function if God doesn't provide. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with having some accordion money in times of ministry expansion and ministry shrinking. There's nothing wrong with that. But having a full year's operating expense in the bank, that money needs to be involved in ministry somewhere. God didn't, what are we going to do when the Lord comes back? Hey, glad you're here. We've been saving for this day since we no longer need to evangelize the world because you're on it and we're all under you. Here's all this operating money you've got, Lord. How do you want to spend it? He was like, you're too late. Should have spent all that before I came. Speaking of spending money and sending people overseas, word on the street is you're going to France.
We are getting ready to go to France. Yeah, this has been, it's been a long time coming between me and Michelle. We've actually spent the past 5 years, not 5 years. Let me back up. When I surrendered to ministry, I wasn't sure what kind of a ministry God was calling me to. I did not know. I remember people around me, when they were surrendering to ministry, they would say things like, well, I'm surrendering to preaching ministry, or I'm surrendering to music ministry, or
right.
Whatever that means.
Yeah.
Youth
ministry. You'll outgrow that eventually.
I wrestled. I don't know what God's calling me to.
Right.
And I stuck on that word surrender. And I said, well, if God's calling me to do something, it'll be in his power, not mine.
Right.
And I think I've strayed from that in my time in ministry, and I've always had to come back to that point to be any semblance of effective.
Yeah.
And anyways, we thought about missions then, and Michelle and I, ever since I surrendered to ministry, we have kind of joked with each other that God was going to send us overseas. We didn't know where. We actually were looking. We were really moved by some missionaries who came and visited our church who had gone to Papua New Guinea, and we're doing church planting work there. And we talked about that, and we never really felt called there. And then I was reading about the spiritual condition in France, and it was about 2 years of just ruminating, on what it means for a place that once sent missionaries to have dried up so much that people don't even view Christianity as a necessary part of life, or religion as a necessary part of life.
They don't even go to the church for their funeral anymore.
Yeah. So I came home. This was early in September, and I told Michelle, I said, I think our delay is turning into disobedience. And man, we moved fast. From that conversation in September, we went and met with churches that would start partnering with us to tell them what we were doing, start to figure out what we were saying yes to.
Yeah. Because
we said yes before we even understood it.
Yeah.
And,
I remember you and I talking about church planting in the River Valley, needing another. The thing that kind of got me started down that needing another, I've always said we don't need any more Baptist churches. We need to fix the ones we got. I always kind of felt like the parent that said, no, you can't have a new toy. You don't play with the toys you have in the toy box. I would look at a lot of church planners and go, no, we don't need another church, bud. Go pick out one of these dysfunctional ones and fix it. But what I began to see is this: the number of Baptist churches that have closed in this immediate area, and I'm talking about Southern Baptist, Missionary Baptist, there's a slew of churches that are no longer in existence. And so I was like, well, what did we replace those churches with? And we didn't. And so you and I were talking about that and just kind of what that would look like and where would we go. And then you called me up about a week later and you go, hey, man, I'm going to France. You'll have to work on all that by yourself. And I was like, what?
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah, that is what you said. You'll have to figure all that out by yourself. I'm going to France. And I was like, well, I felt like that meme I always see. I don't know what it's off of, probably an immoral movie, but it was like, well, that escalated quickly. You know, it's got that guy on there with like a goofy look on his face. I think it's like Will Ferrell or something. I don't know what that's off of.
I hadn't shared with anyone, your pastor in a church.
Yeah, you don't start telling people.
I had not shared with anyone. This had been something that Michelle and I had been talking about privately, literally years.
Right.
About at some point in our life, I think God is calling us to go cross-cultural, to invest somewhere, Honestly, I felt somewhat like pastoring in Greenwood was cross-cultural for me, but
hey, now that's the place of my nativity.
Yes. But we were talking about the church planting. I was like, yeah, we need a church planter. Yes, we do. Yeah, this is something that could happen. And as I'm sitting here praying about this, because I think we got off the call a couple of weeks, said, all right, let's pray about this.
Yep.
Let's really seek the Lord.
I had people telling me, Harold, you should plant the church. And really, this is what they were saying. Gee, I wonder if there are any preachers in Fort Smith area that aren't committed anywhere, huh? And looking at me, and I'm like, that's not what I do. And they're like, God put you there for a reason. Then you got all these people like, God strategically placed you there with a building. Why wouldn't you preach to these lost sinners? And I'm like, oh, man, I kind of felt like I'd been at a youth rally in the 90s, where they guilt trip you into getting saved every weekend.
Yeah, Job's friends.
Yeah.
Job's friends knew what God was doing, too.
So I was like, maybe I should be praying it. I didn't pray about it. I kind of felt like I knew what God called me to do. So you and I were talking about it. And I said, look, I'm just going to spend a couple weeks in prayer. You pray about it. If the Lord wants me to do that, I'll do. Because it's just like what you said. I surrendered into the ministry. Mm-hmm. If that means missionary, if that means pastor, if that means whatever is, I'm his. And I was like, I don't think that's my gifting, but everybody keeps telling me I should. So I prayed. And you prayed. And it wasn't even 2 weeks. We hadn't even met the deadline for you to tell me what the Lord said to you. And you're like, nah, change plans. I'm going to France. You're on your own on this one. And I was like, wow. But then.
So what had happened in those 2 weeks? So I was praying about it. God, can you send somebody? Because I agreed with you. I wasn't one of the friends saying this is what you got to do. I agreed with you. You wanted to help somebody. You wanted to come alongside somebody. You were willing to be the biggest asset in that whole process.
Yeah, I just wanted to be the friend of the groom. I didn't want to be the planner. I just wanted to be the guy that was like, hey, what do you need? I'm here to help.
You want to be Barnabas.
I want to be a Barnabas.
Yeah, and so I'm praying about it, and I'm thinking, man. So our church kind of walked into the Lord. Led our church into a really cool direction where we have an associate pastor. Now, I don't think we need to store up a bunch of pastors inside the church. I think we need to be more worried about sending pastors than we are holding them all up. So part of my question in this was, God, why did you do this? What are you trying to do? Is it time for me to step aside? If I do step aside, do I need to go help Harold with this? Is this your plan? God, you want me to practice planting a church so that I can one day go plant a church? And as I'm praying through that, man, it just hit me. Yes, it's time for you to move aside.
Yeah.
And Fort Smith's not where I'm calling you. So.
Yeah. So then you grabbed a dart and threw it at a world atlas that was spinning, and it stuck in France.
So I studied French in high school. And I studied French in college. And so, and
you've always had an affinity for French toast and French fries.
And I love French toast. And anything with syrup on it, I'm like Buddy the Elf. And
a true story. I hated fried chicken till I got called to preach.
That's hilarious.
It's a fact.
That's a joke.
No, it's a fact. I've got a CD somewhere in my office of the very first sermon I ever preached. And I was preaching out of Genesis, or not Genesis, I was preaching out of Judges 6, where my first sermon was on Gideon. You know, I can't go. I'm the least of my family. And I was given all the excuses of not being able to to go preach and help. And I said, I don't own a suit. You know, I can't go. One of my arguments with God was kind of tongue-in-cheek, joking. I'm like, I don't even like fried chicken. I don't like chicken strips. I don't like chicken sandwiches. I don't like chicken wings. I didn't. I'm here to tell you, within the next month, I started eating Chick-fil-A. I started eating fried chicken. All of a sudden, I was like, I love fried chicken thighs. I love fried chicken legs. I love chicken strips. I'm eating chicken strips off my kids' plate. I'm like, that's little kids' food. That's what little kids eat, just bland old chicken nuggets. It was the strangest thing.
That's hilarious.
I mean, it's a fact. And it's I don't know. I can't explain it.
Well, I'd written this paper in a missiology class about
What's a missiology class?
studying,
Is that like beauty school or something?
Yeah, it was about studying missions, about how do we actually go to all the world, and how do we plant churches. And it was a history class. And this paper that I'd written was about contextualization, about taking the gospel and allowing it to express itself. And while I was working on that, France kept coming up because everywhere people were writing about an unchristian culture. They're trying to make it relatable for people in the West, like you and me, who are in America. But France is spiritually dry.
Yeah.
There's 10 times more people making money in occult practices and shops than there are pastors or missionaries in France.
Yeah, I can believe that.
And
that's becoming all across Europe. France is probably the leading edge, but that's...
So it wasn't really throwing a dart. It was kind of throwing a dart.
So you'd already written a paper on it?
Yeah.
Or you were writing one at the time?
No, I had
You'd already kind of did some background study work.
This was about a year ago.
About a year ago. It was in your head. Mm-hmm. You were thinking about it. So what does it look like? I mean, we were talking early in the podcast about me, and, my ministry kind of is like breathing. My lungs expand, my lungs breathe out. My ministry budget expands, it breathes out. It's largely dependent on not just churches sending me money, but the Lord using me in various ways, whether it's interim pastors or pastorate or revival preaching or whatever. There's always honorarium money coming and going, or salary money coming and going. You're not going to be getting that in France. Right. You're not going to have that flexibility. So you don't have to give me dollars and cents, but you're going to have to secure this support before you go, because you're not going to be able to raise it once you get there. Like me right now, I'm going to go preach next Sunday, not this Sunday, but next, at 2 churches that do support me, and update them, and I'll go and preach at a church that doesn't even really know what I do. So I'm always gaining support even while I'm here. So my ministry is gradually getting larger. You will gradually get larger as people hear what you do, but you're not going to be able to actively raise support.
Yeah, so we're working through the churches of the BMA, and so they have that administrative function that's set up pretty leanly, where they'll be able to manage all of our monies. And that's important for me, because I'm not sure that I have the self-discipline to set my own salary. I'd much rather somebody else set my salary. And
yeah. So
we have to raise all of our support funds before we leave for France in August. I think we have to have at least $10,000 in our missions account before we're able to leave, and then we will have, based off of the money that we have, we will live off of that and also have our missions ministry account. And so what I'm focusing on right now is more, I want people behind me. more than I want dollars and cents. I know that there's that $10,000 figure that I need in my account before I'm even eligible for to be sent. I know that I need people supporting me monthly, churches who will adopt us and send us monthly. I know that I have to raise all of that. But my goal that I've been working off of, rather than being dollars, because I think there's even honor in the widow's mite. You know, I ask people, $100 a month is a very generous gift. I think that's something that for most people is doable. $10 is still a very generous gift.
Yeah.
So I think effective ministry is more about people. And so I'm trying to raise 130 committed monthly supporters. That's my goal. If I had 130 people supporting me monthly, I think God takes care of the rest.
Yeah. Yep. He'd take care of the amounts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good way to look at it. I don't even know. You've asked me, like, what's your monthly support? I mean, how do you, and I'm like, man, I really don't even know, and before I moved my ministry to West Park, when it was still at the church I used to pastor, I never could get a straight answer out of anybody. How much money did I take in? Where did it come from? Who sent it? I might as well have tried to talk to the FBI and get answers out of them. I couldn't get no answers. So now all the money comes directly to me, and it's ran through West Park. It's deposited in their account. The checks that are written to me are from West Park, not from all these people. That all goes into an account. But this is the first year. I'm coming up on the end of the year. I can kind of look and see what my monthly support is, and I'm like, holy smokes, you can't live on that. Like, how have I been functioning all this time? How in the world did this work? There's a thing called God math.
Yep.
And bean counters don't know it. They don't get it. They don't understand it. But everything I receive goes into that account, and I pay myself a salary out of it. And I pay for this building we're sitting in, and the utilities here, and the internet, and books, and all kinds of other things. And I'm looking at that, and I'm like, how in the world? I mean, I'm looking around, I'm looking at and I'm adding up, and I'm like, how's it all funded? God has a way of just stretching resources beyond our wildest dreams.
Before I surrendered to ministry, the bean
Hang on.
counters.
Let me say this.
Yeah.
When Elijah went to the widow,
Yep.
he didn't show up and say, hey, I've got a flour truck pulling up around back, and it's going to have 8 barrels of oil on it, and we're going to live off that flour truck for the next 2.5 years. No. He said, make that first biscuit for me. Then you and him have a biscuit. And every day, she made the first one for him, and then her and her boy had a biscuit. That's the way it should be. And I'm here to tell you, if God gave me a ton of money and said, hey, Harold, I got a couple $1 million. I'm going to drop it in your account. You just leech off of it as you see fit. Son, I would quit praying. I wouldn't need to pray to God. I wouldn't have any needs. I'd say, thank you, Lord, 3 times. I've said grace over all this money, but if he gives me just enough each day to meet the needs, then it's every day. Thank you for the needs you met yesterday. Provide for what we need today. That day to day, give us this daily bread. I don't know how he does it, man.
And that affects all the areas of our life. I don't know how we've ended up talking about money so much, but, and I'm not saying that's bad, but.
Anybody can come comb my books. I ain't got nothing to hide.
But
the point I'm driving at, though, is I think a lot of missionaries don't get that. I know that because I've been a pastor for 15 years, 14 in the same church. I have a lot of those emails. I'll be in your area, blah, 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 blah. Well, I'd like to present my burden to your church. I'm like, keep your burden. I don't even know you, I get hammered by those guys all the time. And I want to say sometimes, look, if God's in it, just go. Just go. If he told you to go, go. And I don't mean run off and starve your family to death, but honest to God, God's never shortchanged me in anything. I don't feel like I'm living in poverty. Although if I look at what I make, I'm like, that's not a lot of money. But if I look at how I live, I'm like, I lack no good thing. I mean, literally lack nothing. I was given a brand new rifle here 2 months ago. How many people can say that other than me, Russell, and Michael Sanchez? Who does that? God does. He provides it as needed. And I say all that to say, I just think sometimes when we mechanize missions, and we get it slicked up and we get us a nice little program going, then we come up with these, oh, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that. I'm like, look, I don't think Paul had that. I don't think Titus had that. I don't think Apollos had that. They didn't lack nothing.
I do the same thing with theology. We try to understand how an all-good, all-wonderful God could possibly love somebody that is constantly in rebellion, and we try to make sense of it, and we just make a mess of it.
Yeah,
we look at how is it possible that God sends his flawed, imperfect people all over the world to proclaim the good news of the gospel, and you try to make sense of it, and it's like you said, it's God math.
Yeah, it's God math. And I think every missionary on the mission field learns God math. And I'm not saying you haven't learned it or you won't. I'm just saying it's a different dynamic. I pastored a long time. I put together a budget every year. We laid that budget out. I got paid off that budget. I was doing that when the country went into a recession. I was doing that when the largest employer in this area closed its doors and laid everybody off, which included about 4 families in our church lost their incomes. And we had to change that budget in the middle of the year. And the only thing that was flexible was not the bank loan. It's not the utilities. We couldn't say, hey, 4 families got laid off. Could you cut our electric bill in half? That didn't work. We couldn't say, go to the bank and go, hey, we're just going to pay half this. That didn't work. We had to go to the only flexible thing in the church, the pastor, and say, hey, we can't afford to pay you what we was paying you. So I went and got a job, took a pay cut, and everything worked out. I never experienced the supply and provision of God financially until I got away from the church and had to be on my own in an unknown field, doing things from an unknown way. And then I went, how'd all this get funded? How'd I end up here? And look back and go, that's all we took in? Well, who paid for this? How'd I end up? I mean, literally, I do it every day. If we gave 1,765 people a free book this year, and we still got like 3 weekends to go, who paid for 1,765 books? And I got a store full of books. I got books behind me on the shelf.
And they're new books.
Yeah,
they're
they're
nice
new, yeah, it's not old stuff. It doesn't look like a yard sale in there.
Right.
Who paid for 1,765 books? And a lot of them people, we gave them a Bible too, and we allow them to take up to 5 booklets, tracts, and pamphlets. We're probably talking like 20 or 30,000 new pieces of literature went out the door. How did we do that on what I make as a missionary? And I'm like, it just don't add up, man. It just don't add up. I didn't experience that as a pastor. That's not a slight to pastors. Some pastors have experienced that. I'm just saying in my own personal walk, it wasn't until I stepped away and I went, look, we don't have enough to cover the bills, but we're going to trust you and go forward. And he was like, okay, let's just see how far we can go. People say all the time, how long are you going to keep doing this? We're going to do it till the Lord quits giving or tells us to do something different. He can do either one. So far, he hadn't quit giving. How long you been doing this? I mean, when you're going to run out of books, I'm like, you would think. We haven't. Missionaries, people don't understand it. It goes back to what you mentioned earlier, Derrick. Most people's idea of missions is just writing a check and mailing it to some centralized headquarters and saying, here, there you go. And so I think you're in that phase where you're going around trying to raise some support. You're going around trying to, get people to understand your ministry, be in contact with them, and that's the key. Man, people want to know what they're paying for. We used to get missionaries all the time. They wouldn't tell us nothing. Where are you at? What are you doing? I was talking to a church just not 2 months ago. They was giving a guy money each month. He wasn't even in missions anymore. They were giving money to one guy who wasn't even in the ministry, but he was still cashing them checks every month and not telling them that he was no longer in missions and no longer even in the ministry. He had a secular job, still cashing missionary checks.
Wow.
I wonder why preachers get a bad name doing stuff like that.
Oh, Michelle and I, there's a lot of faith behind saying, I want to leave the comfort of a church that's been able to provide for us. And
Yep.
It's scary to look at what we're going to, a plane ticket there and back, that's $7,000
Really?
for a family of 4.
Yeah. Wow.
That's an expense we live within our means. We don't live above our means.
Yeah.
And
that's a big step, because I always tell preachers, look, if you get fired, my ministry has some funds. We'll pay your light bill. We'll send a moving truck. We'll get you out of there. Bro, I ain't got a boat big enough to cover the pond in between us. I can't come get you.
So it'd be $3,300 for bring a family of 4 back from France. The money is one thing we're not worried about. You know what? Whenever we're sitting up in bed at night and I'm talking to Michelle, all right, you ready? Anything you want to talk about? Anything that's come up through the week that she's worried about our kids going to school. I don't know if you've heard this. The French are a very hospitable and receptive people. Said no one ever. Right? So she's afraid of our kids getting sat in a corner with a coloring book whenever they go to French school, because that's the only option we have whenever we move over there.
Mm.
When we're crying because our children are holding on to us when we drop them off at school, I'm not going to be worried about how much money's in the bank.
Yeah.
I'm going to be worried about how many friends I
Well,
have that can pray for us.
I'll tell you this. When I surrendered into the ministry, I said, all right, Lord, I'm convinced. This is what I'm supposed to do. I got it. I'm ready. Give me my bullets. Tell me where the battle line's at. I'll start walking that way. But you've got to convince my wife. I can't convince her. You got to convince her. This was like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd been up all, reading my Bible and praying under heavy conviction. I went back here and crawled in bed as quietly as I possibly could. And she goes, did God tell you you're supposed to be a preacher tonight? I said, are you awake? She goes, yes. Did God tell you you were supposed to be a preacher tonight? I said, yeah, he did. She goes, I feel the same way. I said, what? Because before it was like, you're out of your mind. You're not no preacher. You're a horrible Christian. She was telling me, and really, I was just running from God. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I just knew where he was wanting me to go, and I didn't want to go there. So she convinced me. She goes, I said, what, you're okay with that now? She goes, yeah, God convinced me just a few minutes ago. And I was like, how long ago? I was like that guy. When was my son healed? The 7th hour. That's when Jesus said, go home. He's been healed. I was like, when did God tell you this? And she goes, just a few minutes ago before you came in the bedroom, he made it. And I was like, yeah. Okay. So you're okay. She goes, yeah, this is what you're supposed to do. I'm okay with it. I love it. If my God can do that to my wife, I think he can sort out whatever's going on with your kids. I understand your concern. It's not financial concern. It's physical concern. But at the same time, the thing that scares me, and the reason I would be scared to go overseas, I give up my Second Amendment. Other than a week in California when I preached out there, I've never got up and left my home without a pistol in my pocket.
I did hear, I looked it up, they do not allow to hunt squirrels in France.
God, you'll starve to death. You may not. You'll eat good French food, but you'll be malnourished because you won't have proper nutrition.
I'd think they'd like squirrel. They eat more rabbit than we do.
You can't hunt squirrels over there?
Can't hunt squirrels in France.
Not even like with a blowgun or a pellet gun or something? Lord, you are going to the heathen. So we've crossed the hour threshold. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you about maybe hearing more about your ministry or even supporting your ministry, if that's something that they're looking to do, or they just want to call and tell you, hey, man, amen, keep going, we're praying for you, what's the best way to get in touch with you that you want to share online?
Yeah.
A website or a email address would be best.
It'd probably be by email. So Michelle and I have set up a website just kind of as a central hub for our ministry and what we're planning on doing. My email address is Derrick, DERRICK, at livingoutthegospel.com. So you can go to that website, livingoutthegospel.com, read more about what we're doing, how we got called here, or you can get in touch with me by email, and I'd love to talk with anybody who wants to.
That's good. Yeah, I'm excited about you going to France, but I'm never going to come see you unless the Lord, unless I get caught by the enemy during an attack and I get transported overseas and housed in France. It'll probably be the only way I ever see you on your soil.
We'll just see about that.
Look, man, I don't like going to states that don't let you carry a gun. I'm like, man, this is like it's like a communist country, man. I'm telling you, this pocket knife I got in my pocket is too big for California. That's too big.
That's wild.
Yeah, if you're halfway fat like me, you couldn't reach an organ with this knife. I couldn't. This is a flesh wounder.
They eat all those seed oils and stuff. They don't get fat like us.
Yeah, the tofu eaters, I could probably hit their lungs or heart with that. But I'm just telling you, you say, well, brother, are you afraid of dying? No, I've got a God-given commission to protect my wife, my children, and my neighbor. I don't want to sit around and watch them die while some lunatic you can't account for mass murders them. That's why I carry all that stuff. But my point is, I admire you for where you're headed to, and I believe the Lord's called you to go there, and I believe he's going to work out everything to get you there. And I hate to see you go just for selfish reasons, because I like having you around and having a friend in town, and then your church is going to be looking for a pastor, and there's about 8 in 10 chance they're going to get a goober, because good preachers are hard to find. Preachers in themselves are hard to find. Good ones are even harder to find. So
there's people there that we love.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing that's hard about leaving, but you have to trust that God is going to give them exactly what they need.
Yep. He calls you away. He takes care of all the details. Yep. So that's good. Any last words before we wrap it up and get out of here?
No, thank you for having me on here, and man, just thank you for your friendship and what you're doing, pastors all over the country.
I don't do nothing. I'm just friends with a bunch of guys. I always tell people I couldn't be trusted with good looks. So if I had good looks, I might be a womanizer. I can't be trusted with money, because if I had riches, I'd probably, trust in riches. And I couldn't be trusted with strength, because I'd probably be a bully. So instead, I was given to be ugly, poor, with a bad body, but I got a lot of good friends. And so I'm okay with that. Thanks for coming on, man. Till next time, we'll see y'all somewhere in the backwoods.